There is a formula that will allow you to get rid of any bad habit forever in just 4 simple steps. Not many people are aware of this knowledge, and of the people who are, very few are actually disciplined enough to use it. So, if you are an ambitious young teenager like me on self-improvement, then having this information will put you far above a big majority of the population. So to you, I present the 4 laws of behavior change as described in the book Atomic Habits. If you go back in time a few years, you'll find a weaker, pathetic version of me. I couldn't stand my ground against the forces that vied for my health. I was addicted to video games, eating sweets, social media, you name it. My bad habits controlled me, and I was powerless in the face of all these companies that had spent decades and tons of money perfecting the perfect tool to steal my attention, to steal my health, to steal my money. But then I found out about self-improvement. I started researching how I could break free of these shackles that were holding me back. I read Atomic Habits, and armed with this new knowledge, I declared war. And surprisingly, I started winning. Video games was the first one to topple, and then came sweets. And by the time I came to sweets, I was already so far ahead that I just kind of declared I would quit one day, and then did. And finally was my social media and phone addiction, which I got a lot better at, which I explain in more detail in one of my videos that you can check up there. But do that after you watch this video. So by getting rid of all of these bad habits, I can imagine all of my friends at school currently probably watching YouTube or playing video games or doing something else that is most definitely not productive. And meanwhile, here I am recording, talking to you, and working on my YouTube channel. And so if you want to achieve this level of power over your habits as well, then I would like to present to you law number 1, the cue. All habits begin with some sort of cue. Now, a cue is just basically what reminds you of this habit's existence. It can be a time, a place, a particular event, right? So, for example, phone notifications, right? Message notifications are the cue to start, checking your messages. You get a notification on your phone, you weren't thinking about your messages, now you are thinking about your messages, and that's what basically starts your habit. The cue, as the name suggests, is the cue that starts the habit cycle. And so now you might think about, well, how can we leverage this to get rid of bad habits? And the lesson I want you to take away from this section is make it invisible. You might have heard the quote, out of sight, out of mind. Yeah, well, this is basically what it's talking about, right? If there's no cue, if there's no reminder, if you never even start thinking about a habit, then you won't do it, right? Let's say you're trying to quit video games, and every time you go to your room and open your computer and see the Minecraft app at the bottom, the application, that makes you think, oh, I want to play Minecraft, right? But if you never get to that position where you're on your computer and looking at that screen and seeing the Minecraft loadout go to think, oh, I want to play Minecraft, if you never even remember, if you never even think about Minecraft, that thought never even occurs in your mind, then you will never play Minecraft. So if you make the habit invisible, or in a way eliminate all of the cues that lead you to that habit, then you will never do that habit. So I have an actionable step for you. If you're really serious about getting rid of your bad habits, then I want you to follow along with this video as I basically guide you through getting rid of your current worst habit. So if you're watching this video, I'm going to assume there is a bad habit, some bad habit that you have, that you know you have, that you want to get rid of, right? So think of it right now. Right now, think about it. What is the worst habit you have that you want to get rid of? You got it? All right. So now I want you to think about what is the cue for me that makes me want to do this habit. So let's say you have a bad habit of scrolling too much on Instagram, right? So what would you want to do then? Well, think about the cues. When do you think about scrolling on Instagram? Maybe you say, oh, it's in the afternoons on Sundays specifically, and I'm bored and I see my phone lying over there on my table, and suddenly the thought of Instagram pops into my mind, right? This can be one of your cues. There can be many, many cues. For something like scrolling on Instagram, there can be many cues, right? So I want you to write that down, and then after you've got all of your cues down, then I want you to think about, how can I stop myself from getting this cue? So if in the one we described, right, we said in the afternoon on Sundays, you're bored and you see your phone on the table. Well, there's many things there, actually. It's quite a big one. You know, there's a time, there's a location, there's an object, right? So the phone, right, we can just start with removing the phone from the table, right? We said, oh, you see the phone on the table. Yeah, like put the phone in some faraway room, lock it in a cabinet, and then you won't be looking at your table and seeing the phone. Or we can look at the time like aspect of it being on a Sunday afternoon and say, okay, well, get yourself an activity to do that Sunday afternoon. Say maybe go to the gym at the specific time where you'd normally start scrolling. Then you can't start scrolling because you'll be at the gym. Basically, think about it like that. Think about all of the cues. And I want you to start listing them out right now, but I also want to tell you, you can add to this list later. So I genuinely think you should either take out a piece of paper and a pen, or, you know, make a doc, open the notes app, anything, right? Find the habit, do a section called cue, and then write down the cues that lead you to this habit, right? And every time you do this bad habit, I want you to think about, what is the cue that made me get to this bad habit? Like, reflect every time you do the bad habit and add to this notes app or doc or piece of paper that you have, and have a list of cues, and basically just work to eliminate those cues. Remember, make it invisible. This brings us to law number 2, which is craving. So after you think and remember that this habit exists, then you start craving it. I think we can all relate to this example where, you know, there's this bad habit that you know you shouldn't be doing, right? But the thought pops into your mind, that's the cue, right? Like, let's say, you know, you're trying not to eat pizza, but then you walk by the pizza shop and you get the smell and you see a beautiful pizza delivered to someone's table. And that's the cue, right? You start thinking about it. That walking by that pizza shop was the cue. And then you see that pizza and you're like, oh, that probably tastes so good. Like, you start thinking about it. You're like, oh, that would be so nice. I wish I had that. Oh, like the cheese, it looks so great. I can imagine how nice it would taste. That's the craving. If you don't have the craving, you won't do a habit, because then it basically means you don't want to do the habit. The craving is the part where you kind of almost, in extreme cases, fantasize about the habit. And it's important to note here that you're not actually desiring the habit itself, but more so the change in state that it delivers. So for example, with someone who smokes cigarettes, they're not desiring the smoking of the cigarette itself. They're desiring the pleasure that gives them, the dopamine hit that comes from the nicotine. That's what they're desiring. And so what can you take away from this law to apply to your own habits? Well, most of law 2 is actually dependent on law 4, which we'll get to, right? Because as I said, it's dependent on the end product, the result, the reward of this habit. It's the state change it delivers. The cigarette example, it's all about, you know, that dopamine hit you get at the end. But basically, when it comes to law 2, the rule of thumb to maximize this law to get rid of this habit is make it unattractive. One example, going back to the cigarettes, right, is in Atomic Habits, it talked about this person who quit cigarettes by reading a book. And what did this book contain? Well, it was just a very long book about how terrible smoking was, right? It didn't give any tips on how to quit smoking. No, like that's not what it was, a book to make people quit smoking. But it said nothing about, oh, you know, use this hack to get rid of your urges. No. It just talked about how terrible smoking was for you for like an entire book. And that helped that person quit smoking. Why? Because the state change that the habit delivered was very unattractive. So when they got the cue to think about smoking, the craving phase, it's like they don't really crave it anymore because it's like, do I really want all of those like negative side effects? Like it's not very, the habit doesn't seem very attractive to me anymore. And that's a perfect example of making the habit unattractive. But again, you will learn more about law 2 and how to manipulate it in law number 4, because law 2 is basically dependent on law number 4, and we'll get to that. Now, if you've been following the actionable steps and listing out the cues and how you can get rid of them, I want you to do this for law number 2 as well. Basically, think about what makes this habit attractive for you, like what makes you want to do it, and then think about ways of how you can make this habit seem unattractive, how you can make yourself not want to do the habit. And again, make sure you're following along with all of this, because if you want to make the most of this video, you need to actually apply it to your specific circumstances and not just, absorb the information passively. And if you are really committed to self-improvement, and if you really do want to take your self-improvement to the next level, not just passively observe this general information being fed to you from across the screen to hundreds of other viewers, but get this advice one-on-one from me, I have the perfect offer for you. If you don't know, I've recently started doing one-on-one coaching calls, and for the time being, since it's kind of like some test runs, I'm doing a few of them for completely free. And 4 people have already booked their calls, and I said I would do 5 at the beginning, but let's do more. So there's 2 more free calls left. It's the first link in the description. Sign up now. It's very easy, and you get to talk one-on-one with me, and I get to address your exact specific problems. Whatever is your biggest limitation right now, you tell me, and I do all the work I do for like a video like this, except it's to solve your own specific problems. And for the time being, it's completely free. But with that being said, let's get back into the video with law number 3, which is the response. So the response is doing the habit itself, right? Basically, this is the part of the process where you do the actual habit. And, I think this is pretty self-explanatory. I don't need to give explanations and examples of what part 3 is. It's doing the habit. So how can we use law 3 to our advantage? Make it difficult. Make it really difficult to do this habit. And if possible, make it impossible to do this habit. If it's harder to do something, you will be less likely to do it. If it's impossible to do something, you will not do it. And some examples of how I've used this in the past is this app called ScreenZen, which I talk about in my video about how I reduced my screen time. And basically what it does is whenever I want to open an app that's, going to be harmful for me, or some sort of social media, video game, something that's going to waste my time, ScreenZen pops up like this little screen that says, are you sure you want to open this app? Is this important? And if I say yes, I have to wait on that screen for 60 whole seconds. And it's like, 60 seconds, it's not like, trust me, when you wait that whole 60 seconds and you're only there to get a quick burst of dopamine from TikTok, for example, like that 60 seconds is a lot of time. And basically what that does is just make it difficult. It makes it difficult for you to open that app. App blockers work in the same way. It's trying to make it difficult for you to open the app in a hope to get rid of that habit. In fact, if you think about it, right, any of these strategies that you hear to quit anything actually aligns with one of these 4 laws. And, you can look back at this after the video is over and everything, but if you reflect on all of the methods you used to get rid of a habit, they somehow correlate to one of these laws, which I think is pretty cool to think about. But yeah, basically right now, continuing along with the actionable steps for your bad habit, think about how can you make it difficult to do this habit, right? If there is an item you need to do this habit, how far away can you put that item? How hard can you make it to get that item to do this habit? Or, after you've gotten that item, how hard can you make it to actually start doing the bad habit? The harder it is to do the habit, the less likely you are to do it. Which brings us to the final step. Law number 4, which is the reward. Now, most people's conception of the habit cycle would end at you doing the habit, right? It's the stuff that leads up to the habit, and then the habit itself, that's the response, that's the final step. Well, it's not. The final step is the reward, and it's a very important step that most people forget about. You see, everything in this cycle is about the reward. The cue is about noticing the reward. The craving is about wanting the reward. And the habit, the response, is about obtaining the reward. Everything is based on this reward. Without the reward, all of this crumbles. The reward is the glue that holds the entire habit together. Without it, none of the steps have any reason to exist. Our brains, they're designed in a system where they try new things and then they get response from their environment, and from that learn whether they should do it again, right? So, for example, you touch a hot pan and it hurts. That's a negative reward. It's a punishment that you get for doing that. And because you get negative feedback for doing that action, that doesn't become a habit. Like, I don't think anyone struggles from a habit of touching like hot pans and burning their finger. I don't think that's a bad habit that anyone struggles with. Now, I don't know, you could probably prove me wrong, like search up on Google, and out of the 8 billion people on this earth, maybe someone has that sort of weird addiction, but but you get my point, right? All of the bad habits that you think about, they have some sort of reward for it. All sorts of drugs and instant gratification, it's that quick spike of dopamine that you get after doing that pleasure that you feel for doing that habit, and that's the reward. That's what keeps you coming back. So what can you do about this? Well, first of all, you want to keep this thing in mind. The more immediate the punishment/reward is, the more effective it is. So with drugs, we know that it's terrible for us in the long term, but it gives a quick boost of pleasure in the short term. And our brains are wired in a way where they totally, prioritize the short term over the long term. That's just how our brain is wired. And so that's why with drugs, the short-term reward, even though it's a lot smaller than the long-term consequences, the short-term reward wins out over the long-term consequences that we're well aware of. So the lesson here for law number 4 is make it unsatisfying. Give some sort of punishment for doing the activity. And again, I want you to keep in mind, as you're coming up with this punishment per se for your activity, the more immediate it is, the better, right? Like, you already know that doing these things is bad for you. And you can go for the approach of making the long-term consequences more pronounced in your head and more thought about per se, right? That's what that book about cigarettes did for the person who quit smoking, right? It was like, oh, cigarettes are terrible for you, like this, like this, like this. And all of those long-term consequences like got built up in your head, and it's like short-term rewards/consequences have like a 10x multiplier. Think about it that way. Even still, if the long-term consequences are big enough, then like people won't want to do it, right? If there was this thing and it gave you a lot of pleasure, but you were guaranteed to die like 10 days later, then I don't think any of us would be doing it, because, that's like some pretty bad long-term consequences to the point where, it's pretty clearly not worth it. But just think about that. Like, you can go for the approach of making the long-term consequences more vivid, more pronounced, but if you can, make the process of doing the action worse and unsatisfying. Give an immediate punishment for doing the activity that's not good, right? Really make that reward, like really make it so that doing that activity gives you a terrible and undesirable result at the end. And as I said before about how Law 2 ties into Law 4, well, basically the only reason you crave it is because you're craving the reward, right? Like, that's the whole point of Law 2, you're craving the reward. So if we make the reward, actually, like, if we remove the reward, like, if we can do that, if we can remove the reward, and then place a punishment in its stead, then there's going to be no reason for us to pursue that goal, and we're not going to crave it. And so those are the 4 laws of behavioral change. But before you click off, wait, because there's more I want to tell you. First of all, I hope you followed along the actionable steps, and for each law, I hope you wrote down all of the things specifically to your habit and thought about ways you can change it. And hopefully you will apply those things to that habit and you will break that habit. But we're not done. I have another bonus tip for you, and that is to, first of all, openly declare war, and then declare you quit and make it a part of your identity and leverage your ego. So I know I just said a bunch of words there, but let me give you an example, right? Think about two people who are both trying to quit drinking. They're exactly the same person, except for one thing. You ask the first person if he wants a drink, and he says, no, I'm trying to quit. You ask the second person if he wants a drink, and he says, no, I don't drink. Which of these people are more likely to succeed in not drinking? Definitely the second person. And I know it's just such a subtle difference in wording. That's all it is. It's just a slightly different way of wording it. But it's also really important because it reflects a difference in identity and the way they view themselves. The first person in their head has already quit drinking. They don't drink anymore. That's part of their identity. The other person is trying to quit drinking, right? Their default state is one of being a drinker. They still believe they drink. And every time they try to push out of what they believe they are, they're using effort. And the instant they let go of that effort, they go back, they revert to their original state, which is what they believe to be someone who drinks. And so this unfortunate guy who believes that he's a drinker, who's trying to quit, right? The other person in their head has already won the war. They've quit. In their head, they totally believe, I don't drink. And that person is going to be way more likely to not drink. So in that way, try to leverage your identity, right? Put this into your identity. I quit. I'm not trying to quit. I have quit. I'm not doing it again. And also use your ego, right? Really get your ego involved in this. I don't know. It's different for everyone, but really make yourself think about is this what I'm losing to? Is this what's really holding me back? Me, I've done so much. Think about what it is you've done, and this object, this app that's designed by these CEOs that's trying to steal my time, and I'm losing to them, right? It's just this tiny thing. Really get your ego involved. Almost get yourself hyped up to really beat this thing and show it who's boss, And if you get your ego and your identity involved in this will definitely make the whole process a lot easier. And there we go. If you've listened all the way through this video, first of all, you're probably in my top 5% of viewers, right? So out of the people like you who are young people on self-improvement watching this video, out of all of those people, only 5% or less made it to this point in the video. And you are one of them, right? You have the attention span to have followed through. And if you have followed through all of the actionable steps as well, nothing is stopping you from putting forth this plan tomorrow. No, not tomorrow, today, and eliminating this bad habit once and for all. There is nothing that will get in your way, because it doesn't matter if your discipline is low. It doesn't matter if your willpower is currently weak. It doesn't matter if you completely get rid of the cue, if you completely get rid of the craving, if you make it impossible to do the action, if you make the reward or the consequence extremely bad to the point where you don't want to do it because it's a terrible consequence, right? Or if you get close to that in all four of them, right? You don't even have to, completely max out all of them. You can do a little in all of them. But you realize that if you do that, it's actually a lot easier to get rid of these habits than you first anticipated. It's not your fault that you have these habits. It's the fault of these CEOs that are currently exploiting your health and your life to make more money for themselves. Think about how selfish that is. You're ruining other people's lives just to make a few more dollars off of them, right? That's basically what the social media companies are doing. That's basically what the cigarette companies and all the drug companies and all of those companies are doing to you. They're getting you addicted onto their product, and there's not much you can do about it, right? And you've been doing basically all you can be doing. You've been watching these videos, but really the blame is on these evil corporations. But you're doing a great job, as I've said. And if you put forth, this is your final actionable step in this video, take all that you've done through this video, all of that list, all of the things that you brainstormed you can do to get rid of this habit, and put them into action. Implement them right now as this video ends. Implement them into your day. And with that said, I hope you succeed in getting rid of these bad habits. Now, one last thing, if you really are serious about getting better on self-improvement and you want something to boost your progress speed even further, then you can, first of all, like and subscribe. Subscribing basically means you're going to get more videos like this in your feed rather than Mr. Beast videos, which I think are definitely worse. But I don't know, you decide. And I also want to say, if you find these useful, then there's that free one-on-one coaching call always. It's the first link in the description, and it's totally free. And it's basically like having one of these videos, except twice as long and designed specifically for you. Like, imagine how useful that would be if your biggest constraint could just poof, disappear. But that's all. I'll see you next time. And remember, stay extraordinary.